and training, showcasing the latest in data science and AI, and it starts on Monday, the 14th of June until Friday, the 18th of June. I'm Patty Holly. I'm the manager of the Jean Golding Institute. And first, I want to talk about some housekeeping points. This session will be recorded, and please ensure that you have read through the JGI Code of Conduct and the Policy for Virtual Events. Please mute your microphone unless we ask you to speak, and we will be very, very thankful if you can complete the registration and feedback forms, because this will help us organize events better next time. Please introduce yourself in the chat box. Please share your name, your role, and where you're from. You can also gonna have the chance to ask questions to our presenter. We're gonna use it. We're gonna ask questions through Slido. Please join slido.com in your browser, and the number of the session is 9899. So yes, please, we will answer all the questions at the end of the event. So the Jean Golding Institute is a hub for data science and data-intensive research at the University of Bristol. We are one of 5 university research institutes, and we connect multidisciplinary experts throughout the university and beyond. The Jean Golding Institute collaborates with international and national partners. For example, we have a collaboration with the Strathmore University in Kenya, which delivered a fantastic talk today. We also work with the Institute of Statistical Mathematics in Tokyo, Japan, and with national partners like the UK National AI and Data Science Institute, the Alan Turing Institute. We offer a range of training and funding opportunities and coordinate a data science consultancy service called Ask JGI. You can find more about all the opportunities that they are provided by the Jean Golding Institute at our website, bristol.ac.uk/Golding. As you can see, thanks for our generous collaborations and partners, we can deliver a full range of events this week, and they are color-coded, seminars in yellow, training in blue, and workshops in green. And you can download a copy of these from our website, so please take a look and join other events. We would like to thank these partners, and because of their generous contribution, all the events and training are free of charge. There are plenty of opportunities to connect with us and to researchers of the university. So please link up and follow us on Twitter at JGI Bristol, #Bristol Data Week. You can also subscribe to our newsletter. We send it once a month. We have a data ethics club for those people that are interested in discussing ethics issues. And you can visit, like I said before, our website and a blog. I also wanted to invite you to, hopefully will be our first face-to-face event next year in February, the 17th and 18th of February at the MShed. We'll be showcasing the latest interdisciplinary advances in data science and AI. And it's going to be a family-friendly event open to the public. We will have inspiring speakers, exhibitions, workshops, art, and interactive displays. So if you would like to showcase your research, or you would like to network with people working in data science and in applications, I hope you can join us. So it's a great pleasure. I'm going to stop sharing now. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, Professor Dave Cliff. Dave joined the University of Bristol as a professor of computer science in 2007. Before that, he held professional roles at the University of Southampton and at the MIT Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, and has also worked for 7 years on commercial deployable AI and data analytics in industries such as Hewlett-Packard Labs and Deutsche Bank. He led the design and the creation of the Jean Golding Institute, led the development of the university suite of engineering-based data science MSc degrees, and is the current director of the MSc Data Science program. He's also the director of the University Intelligent Systems Lab, which hosts over 130 researchers, all working in cutting-edge AI, machine learning, and data science. He's a fellow of the British Computing Society and a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. This talk, Data Science and Financial Technology, Rise of the Robot Traders, Dave gives an overview about the opportunities and risks of using big data, in this case from the financial markets, to create technologies, such as robot traders. And with his vast experience in this field, he will provide an overview on where we are now, how we got there, and what other things might go next. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks very much, Patty. I'm just going to share my screen, and then I have to do the thing which everyone always does, which is say, can you see this and can you hear me? Okay, you can see it, you can hear me, that's great. So, thanks to Patty for that fine introduction. As she mentioned, I'm director of our Intelligent Systems Labs, plural, which is a collection of smaller labs. One of those smaller labs is our Financial Engineering Lab, and I've been working in financial engineering one way or another for about a quarter of a century, and it's extremely, extremely data intensive. Right, you can now actually hear me, I'm hoping. Sorry about that.
Yes.
I was talking away to myself. Let's share this. Right, here we go. Okay, so yeah, I'm director of the Intelligent Systems Lab here at the University of Bristol in the Faculty of Engineering. That's a collection of smaller labs, and one of the smaller labs in that collection is our financial engineering lab. And I've been working in financial engineering for about 25 years. And in those 25 years, human traders have largely been replaced by robots. That's the term that gets used in industry, although they're not mechanical robots. They don't have wires or wheels. They're just pieces of software. And so I thought I'd tell the story of what happened. So the menu for this slot, apologies to everyone that we started a bit slow. In consequence, I'm going to talk rather fast. But I did say that this talk required no background knowledge. So the opening slides, and there's quite a lot of slides, but don't worry, none of them last for very long, is a very brief explanation to why we have stock markets and then what happens on a financial exchange. That could be an exchange for stock, or it could be an exchange for currency or commodities. And then I'll talk about the rise of the robot traders. And it's a partial story in both senses of that word. So it's partial in the sense that it's incomplete, because I don't have very long, and it's also partial in the sense that it's biased, because I'll tell you the story from my side, because I was quite, well, as you'll see, I was fairly reasonably heavily involved in some of this. And then in the closing slides, I'm going to talk about the research here in our lab, and also our brand new MSc in Financial Technology with Data Science. So that MSc has been advertised this year, and our first students arrive in October of this year, and they will then study for 12 months. So that's what's coming. So requiring no prior knowledge, why do we have stock markets? Well, let me explain. Here's Lucy, and Lucy wants to start a chain of psychiatry shops, but she hasn't got enough money to set up her first shop. So, and this is a bit like Dragon's Den, if you've ever seen the TV program. So what she says is, okay, I need $1,000 to start up, and that will buy you, if you invest, a 50% share of the business. Now, as it happens, she doesn't know anyone who's got $1,000 to spare, but she does have her friends Franklin, Pigpen, and Linus, and between them, they can come up with $1,000. So Franklin's good for 500, Pigpen for 400, and Linus has got 100. So Lucy has her investors, and she has the money she needs to establish her business. These traditionally would be known as angel investors or founding investors. Then she starts the business. She's charging 5 cents a shot for a bit of psychiatric help, and at such a reasonable price, the business prospers. So first she has one branch, then she has another, then she has another, then she has another, and then she thinks, I'm onto something here. So maybe what we could do is run an initial public offering, an IPO. This is where the stock that was previously held by those private initial investors can now be tradable from anyone to anyone else. So she says, my business has grown to the point where I'm going to sell 1,000 shares at $10 each. So the business is now valued at $1 million. And if she does that, then her 50,000 shares, because she had half of the company, She's now sitting on a net paper worth of $500,000. But importantly, the people who had faith in her, the people who saw the value of investing in her company at a very early stage, they also are sat on a paper worth that's much greater than their initial cash investment. So Franklin's up for 250k, Pigpen 200, and Linus 500. This is good news for them. So the founders and the founding investors sell their stock to some number of people who also want to invest. And that, in the initial public offering, is what's known as the primary market. And that really only happens once. At this stage, the initial investors and the founders have realised a large amount of cash. That paper worth is now actual cash value, assuming that they dispose of their entire holdings. But the people that have just bought the shares, they don't necessarily want to hold them forever. They might have been purchasing them as some kind of an investment or savings scheme, and subsequently they want to sell them. And the founders might decide later down the line that actually they'd like to buy some more stock, and they have to buy it from the secondary market. We'll ignore for the time being the thorny issue of secondary stock issues. So once the primary market has released its shares into the public, once the IPO has happened, we have what's referred to by economists as the secondary market, which is where essentially anyone can buy shares from anyone else and anyone can sell shares to anyone else, given various legal restrictions like a minimum age or nationality and having been authenticated by a know your customer routine. But that's essentially the operations of the stock market. So then the question is, well, what's the best way of organising this secondary market? And one way would be to just have this big tangle of interactions. So you could, instead you could draw all the participants in a ring, and you could just say, okay, anyone can contact anyone else, maybe by email, maybe by phone, and they can say, I'm looking to buy, have you got anything to buy? Or I'm looking to sell, would you like to buy from me? And in the industry, this is known as OTC. It stands for over the counter. It doesn't matter why. But as you can see, it's kind of random, and it depends on the extent to which you know the right people, or the extent to which the right people will take your call or answer your email. So OTC markets exist for kind of interbank markets or funds, transactions between fund management companies, but very few people on the street, normal people like you or me, involve themselves in OTC markets. The primary alternative, in fact, in many markets, the much bigger alternative in terms of the volume of shares that are traded, is to go via an exchange. Exchanges, historically, were rather grand buildings, and those of you who are watching this who have spent time in Bristol or who are resident in Bristol might recognise this building. It's on St Nicholas's Street in the centre of Bristol, and it's a rather fine curry house. But Indian restaurants are often not in such grand buildings. It's a curry house now, but when it was built, it was the Bristol Stock Exchange. Because at the time, within almost living memory, so in the year that I was born, which is 1966, there were 22 regional stock exchanges across the UK. And people would buy and sell shares at these regional stock exchanges. And then at the end of every day, information about the transactions would be relayed to the London Stock Exchange, which held a kind of central register. But as phone lines and then computer communications became more and more efficient, so markets became centralised. And so until about 20 years ago, most developed economies just had a single national exchange. So for the UK, that was the London Stock Exchange, if we're talking about equities, stocks and shares. There are other exchanges for other asset classes, like metals or other commodities like oil or gas. Anyhow, the central thing that an exchange does, a financial exchange does, or very many financial exchanges do, is it operates a data structure. And here, all of this conversation is really getting you to the point where you understand just how much data we need to talk about if we're interested in working in the financial markets. So this data structure is known by everyone as the LOB. The LOB stands for the limit order book. And I need to explain how a limit order book works, and then we'll do a tiny half a page of maths to show you just how much data comes out, and then we'll be talking about what this means for using data science in financial trading. So let's say that initially the market opens and no one has announced any interest to either buy or sell shares in Lucy's psychiatrist business. And then Charlie says he'll buy 2 for £10. Now, technically, an offer to buy is known as a bid. So Charlie is saying that he will bid quantity of 2 at price of 10. And that is entered on this thing called the limit order book. It's called a limit order because what he's saying is he doesn't want to pay any more than the 10 quid that he's offering. And he'll pay 10 quid for each of the 2. So that's a price per unit and then a quantity, which is the number that he's prepared to pay. A little while later, that's Franklin. Franklin says, well, I'll sell 1 for 20. So what Franklin is doing is, again, is imposing a limit. He'll say, I'll sell, but I'm not going below 20. So that gets entered onto the limit order book. So now we have a price of 20 and a quantity of 1. One thing to know is that, and an offer to sell technically is known as an ask. So the ask price is 20 per unit and the quantity is 1. And the bid side of this table, this order book, is known as the bid book. The ask side is known as the ask book. And those two halves of the book are ordered best to worst. So the best bids are the ones that are bidding the higher price because they're more attractive to potential sellers. And the best asks are those that have the lower prices because they're more attractive to potential buyers. So as we see, as subsequent orders come in, this limit order book, this LOB, gets populated with a record of all the orders, all the limit orders that have been announced but have not yet executed. So who's that? That's by the way, I don't necessarily remember the names of all of these characters, but there's Pigpen. Pigpen's offering to sell 2 for 18. That's a lower price, so that's a better ask than the current best one. So that will go to the top of the LOB. Then the next person is, can't remember her name, might be Maisie. She says that she'll buy 3 for 10. Well, we've already got 2 for 10 on the bid side of the book, quantity of 2 for 10. So she's just adding another 3 to give a total of 5 for 10. So one thing you'll notice is that this limit order book isn't showing the individual orders, it's aggregating, and it's also anonymizing. It doesn't show who the orders came from. All the participants in the market can see the LOB, but no one knows the identity of the traders who have contributed orders that are represented on the LOB. A little while later, the little yellow bird, Woodstock, he says that he'll sell 1 for 18.75. That's not improving the best price, but it's not as bad as the lowest price, so that's going to get slotted into the middle. There it is. Next one up is Charlie Brown's sister, whose name I've forgotten. I apologise. She offers to buy 2 for 16.50. That's now quite a significant improvement on the best bid. And then Snoopy the dog, he comes in and he says, I'll sell 3 for 9.99, which means he's prepared to sell for a lower price than you can see the current best bid or even the current lowest bid is. So the 3 that he's looking to sell, 2 will go to the buyer who was offering 16.50 and 1 will go to the first buyer who offered 10. So what that means is that 3 disappear from the bid side and 2 are sent to Charlie Brown's sister and 1 are sent to Charlie himself, and trading continues. So that data structure, a limit order book, here at this stage in the process, you can see that it's got 4 prices on it. There are 2 bid at 10, and then there's 1 bid at one asked at prices of 18, 18.75, and 20. So we can think about that as four data points, where for each data point there's a price where there's active interest, and then there's a quantity associated with that active interest. Now let's do some maths. The first thing to say is, I told you that in the context of stock market trading, but actually LOBs are used for financial exchanges in any tradable asset. And in real markets for a liquid asset, the LOB might have tens or hundreds of different prices, and it might update tens or hundreds of times per second. So let's just say that we're looking at something like, I don't know, Vodafone, that's traded on the London Stock Exchange. That might have, and again, just picking some numbers out of the air that are entirely plausible, it might have 75 different price points, different data points in its LOB at any one time, and it might be updating 50 times a second as people from all around the world connecting electronically add their orders, some of which will result in transactions and some of which will just result in updates of the limit order book. So that means we've got, typo there, that should be 75, not 74. 75 times 50 times 60 times 60 times 8. So over an 8-hour day, we'd have about 106 million data points per day, and that's for a single asset. If you look across all the assets, all the companies that are traded on the London Stock Exchange, currently it trades a few over 1,300, so you'd have over 100 billion data points per day. And clearly, if you gathered all that data and tried to process it in an Excel spreadsheet, and perhaps we could have told Track and Trace about this before they ran into trouble with the limit on how many rows an Excel spreadsheet would allow, but clearly this would swamp most conventional data analytics tools that you might be familiar with using from your desktop. So we're quite definitely in the realm of big data. But the other thing is that, well, here I need to point out that there's a school of thought in economics called the efficient market hypothesis, where people fool themselves that markets are efficient and there's nothing to be learned from studying the statistics of what's going on in the markets, or even just the basic arithmetic of what's going on in the markets. I think of them as kind of benign flat earthers. Markets are not efficient, and the inefficiencies are generally the places where large amounts of money can be made, but identifying those inefficiencies requires you typically to do a shed load of statistics on a massive shed load of data. So that's how we get a data science angle on what we're talking about today. Anyhow, what I want to do now is give a very quick bit of history. This is a map of central London. You can see quite clearly, just above the midline is Cornhill, and immediately above that is Threadneedle Street, and above the N in Threadneedle Street is Pig Street. I'll come back to Pig Street. If you go down below Cornhill, there's Lombard Street, and then there's a collection of little alleys like Albuchurch Lane and St Nicholas Lane and St Clement's Lane. And around there were coffee shops where in the very early days of companies issuing stock, issuing shares, and those shares being tradable, people that were interested in buying and selling shares would just wander from coffee shop to coffee shop to coffee shop to buy and sell their shares. This was essentially an OTC market. And some of the coffee shop proprietors started to chalk up the most recent transaction prices of what the most recent sale price was or what the most recent purchase price was, in order that you could come into a coffee shop and look at the chalkboard and think, oh, okay, that's the current price. Eventually, this community, this informal, over-the-counter community of traders, formed an institution which became known as the London Stock Exchange, and it bought that triangle of property up above Threadneedle Street, where Pig Street is, and it built the first London Stock Exchange, which was a glorious building populated entirely by men, because of this. This is when British society was more sexist than it is now, and all those men had to wear top hats because that was the fashion of the day. This was a really nice building, but the available information communications technology was very primitive. The fastest way you could get a message from A to B at the point in the 1850s when this building was opened was via horse. And indeed, financiers employed relay teams of horse riders who would bring news of a failed crop or of a ship that was sunk or of a bountiful cargo that had been brought in by a boat travelling from abroad. So this was the way in which information was carried around and carried to the market, so that traders could operate on the basis of the information that they had. And subsequently, advanced technology was developed involving pigeons, carrier pigeons. Famously, the founder of the Rothschild Bank had a set of carrier pigeons and messengers posted at the Battle of Waterloo. And when Napoleon was defeated, messages were sent to Rothschild via carrier pigeon at the exchange. And he very ceremonially opened the messages, and he had let it be known that he would be the first recipient of the news of the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo. And he then looked crestfallen and kind of shook his head, according to all the stories. And everyone assumed that he had heard that Napoleon had been victorious. This would be a massive financial disadvantage for Britain, because Britain was now a loser nation. And so everyone sold their stock. Prices crashed. And then Rothschild had positioned his people all around the market to buy at this very low price. And once he had secured all these bargain cut price deals, he lifted up the news and said, hurrah, we've won. So if you think market manipulation is a new thing, that story, which some people say it's not entirely true, but it's a story in wide circulation. That story shows that even with carrier pigeons, you could manipulate markets. But clearly there's there's an economic, a financial advantage to having information that the counterparties to your transaction don't have. And so there's always been a race to develop more and more advanced ICT, information and communications technology. Well, pigeons need somewhere to rest. So in many countries, we erected poles and strung wires for the pigeons to rest on when they were tired of flapping their wings. And after a short while, we realized that we could also send signals down those wires, telegraph, and suddenly you could get information from A to B, from one telegraph station to another, essentially at the speed of light. And this meant that trading could now take place on transcontinental scales. So this is the Los Angeles Stock Exchange, another now non-existent regional stock exchange, but trading could take place, for instance, in Los Angeles, but in synchrony with other exchanges in the USA or around the world. So here we see a very similar story to what we saw in Victorian times, a bunch of traders on the trading floor gesturing at each other, and then up on the balcony, you can see two men there, and what those men are doing is, once again, they're carrying a stick of chalk and they're chalking up prices as transactions happen. So this is like a kind of overhead display of the financial information. This is in, I think, the 1920s, and if you wind forward 80 years, you have exactly the same dynamic, except now the people on the balcony have been replaced by, and you can see this is old technology, this is cathode ray tubes, the old big glass screens, before we had LED displays. Michael Bloomberg talks about how when he joined an investment bank on Wall Street in the early 1970s, the entire processing system for dealing with orders and settling claims and transferring money was exactly the system that had been created when that bank was set up 100 years earlier. So really nothing changed apart from the display technology in the financial markets for the best part of 100 years. This photo comes from around the turn of the century, around 20 years ago. And within 7 years, so this is New Scientist writing in 2007, most financial markets had totally depopulated. You never saw bunches of traders interacting with each other. The New York Stock Exchange still maintains what is essentially a cosmetic gaggle of human traders in order to produce good newsreel. I mean, they're genuinely doing trading, they're not actors, but the vast majority of trades on the markets are nowadays no longer involving face-to-face so-called open outcry in the trading pits, because an awful lot of the business went off to trading floors of big institutions like investment banks or fund management companies. So all of these people on this image, I used to work at Deutsche Bank as a foreign exchange trader. This isn't actually the floor I worked on, but our trading floor looked exactly like this. So lots of traders, they're interacting with other traders, but no one's interacting with anyone in the same room. They're all using phones and screens to interact with traders at other banks on other trading floors in the same city, or potentially in other cities in different countries in the same geography, or perhaps actually anywhere in the world. So these human traders are still doing the job that we saw people doing on the trading floor, but they're doing it via electronically mediated communications. An awful lot of data is sent to them. They process it with their brains, and then small amounts of data, essentially orders to buy or sell or to cancel a previous order or adjust a previous order, are issued by the traders. And all of those orders go back to a central exchange, and the exchange updates the limit order book and then pumps the limit order book back to all the screens that you can see here and all the corresponding screens in other trading floors around the country or around the world. So what you have is a situation where on the trading floor in the institution, you have a bunch of local servers, and it's talking to the big computer at the exchange that does the business, that looks after the limit order book. And historically, for a good 25 years, those local servers were operated by the humans that we just saw, the human traders who, let's not forget, were paid often extremely generous amounts of money. And if we believe the laws of supply and demand, then they must have been paid lots of money because they had skills that were scarce. Because if anyone could do that job, then presumably there would be an oversupply, and the price of paying for someone to do that job would fall down. That never happened. But the thing I'm here to talk about today is the fact that those humans operating those local servers over the last 15 years or so have almost entirely been replaced by pieces of software, so-called robot traders. And the reason for that is encapsulated by this image here, which is a salami slicer. So when you're a trader, if you do a really big order, if you have to suddenly unload 100,000 shares of IBM, or you're suddenly told by a pension fund that they need you to buy 100,000 shares of Apple, the amount of money that you're moving in the market, either by selling or by buying, shifts the supply or the demand. So if you suddenly announce an intent to buy a very large amount, then that's increasing demand. And everyone in the market knows that when demand increases, prices go up. So when you go to quote a price, when you go to try to find someone who'll give you a fair price for your deal, suddenly they're quoting prices that are far higher than you can see on the screen, because they know that you're looking to buy a big amount. Similarly, if you're looking to sell a large amount, then they will quote prices much lower than you can see on the screen, because they're basically second guessing the fact that when you sell, that will increase supply, and in times of increased supply, typically prices fall. So the traders allowed pieces of software to be installed on their trading terminals, which salami sliced these big orders. They would take a big order, hand it to a piece of software, and the software would divide it into lots and lots and lots of very thin slices and dribble these tiny orders into the market over some period of time. And in doing that, they didn't get this shift of price whenever they were trying to do a big deal. That shift of price is called market impact. And an awful lot of the early technology in automated trading was geared around trying to give traders automated tools for getting rid of market impact. What this did, though, was essentially establish a beachhead for advanced technology. So the traders now had automated trading systems running on their terminals, and it was up to the trader to give the automated system some work to do or not. Now, this is where I enter the story, because in 1996, cutting a long story short, I was working at the University of Sussex, but I got an invite to go to Hewlett-Packard Labs as a visiting academic, and they said, come to HP and do something that you've never done before, because we will own all the software, we will own all the intellectual property rights. And my boss at Sussex, he said, okay, do that, but just make sure that you publish a technical report that's got all your program code in it at the end of when you wrap up there. I was there for 7 months. Because that way, once you're back, we can just go to the Hewlett-Packard tech report library, because they're all public documents, and we can access your code, and then you can build on what you've done while you're at HP. So I said, okay, fine, I'll open source my code, because that's how we now refer to this. And I said to HP, I'm quite interested in financial markets. I think they're going to be a very interesting place for the kind of disruptive effects of new technology. So why don't I build you something that does automated trading? And HP said, well, that sounds really interesting. No one's done that before. So they gave me 7 months to come up with an automated trader. And cutting a really long story short, because we're short of time, my trader is known as ZIP, Zero Intelligence Plus, and all the software for that was published by Hewlett-Packard as a public document in 1997. What I didn't know was that at exactly the same time, a PhD student in the US called Steve Gerstad was working with his supervisor, John Dickhout, and John and Steve came up with Steve came up with an algorithm, which, because of the surnames of those two people, everyone else started referring to that trading algorithm as the GD algorithm. And then Steve went to work at IBM, and some IBM people worked with Steve to improve his algorithm, and they called it the modified Gerstad-Dickhout algorithm. So that's the MGD algorithm. And when you look on Google Images for MGD, you find a bottle of beer, Miller Genuine Draft. So this is MGD, and my thing is ZIP, and he did his work, I did my work. We were both doing other things. And then in 2001, by then I was working for Hewlett-Packard, and I got a phone call because Hewlett-Packard's press office were getting loads and loads of inquiries because this article had appeared in New Scientist. What I didn't know was that Steve and his colleagues at IBM had taken MGD, his algorithm, and also my algorithm, and had taken mine purely because all my code was in the public domain as open source. And they had tested under proper experimental lab conditions whether these algorithms could outperform human traders. And what they had found is that they could. And they really could. You know, it wasn't a marginal difference. The automated trading systems were way better than human traders, consistently scoring several percentage points of profit. So, let's go back. So IBM published a paper in the most prestigious AI conference on the planet, which is called IGCAI, on agent-human interactions in the continuous double auction. The continuous double auction is just the process that the limit order book allows traders to engage in. So the kind of it's like a form of auction. People are trying to discover a price via the limit order book. And IBM, who are a pretty conservative company, said that the impact of this technology might be measured in billions of dollars annually, because what it meant was the future would be markets in which there were still traders representing Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or Deutsche Bank, but those traders would no longer be human, they would be software. And so that really is what's happened over the last 20 years or so, because if you can get rid of the humans from a trading floor, 95, 98, 99% of the costs disappear. And this is now known as algorithmic trading. If you look at Wikipedia, which is never wrong, then there's a whole page on the history and typical strategies in algorithmic trading. And under the section of refinement and growth, there's this paragraph which basically says that, you know, one of the key moments in the development of algorithmic trading was that set of experiments by IBM, where they took Steve's work and my work and showed that humans could be outperformed by human traders. This was picked up by the Financial Times, Zippy agents, so they're talking about my stuff there, and lots of people in the financial markets seem to think that I was some sort of evil mad scientist out to put them out of work. There was a head of trading at Credit Suisse who said that I looked like the bad guy in a Bond movie. I am now friends with him, but that was an interesting moment. So what's happened then is robot software was running on local servers, but lots of people were trying to connect via different lengths of cable, and then people realized that the length of cable actually, because electrical pulses travel at c, which is, or they travel at close to c, the speed of light in a vacuum, that if my cable is twice as long as your cable, then my pulses take twice as long as your pulses to get to the exchange. And actually that tiny, tiny fraction of a second might make a difference. So then what happened is the exchanges started to say, well, okay, you can run one machine that's in our building, and the wire that connects your machine, referred to as a proximity server, to our server, our exchange server, will be the same length for all customers. So that puts everyone back on a level playing field. And then what people did to try and get even more speed advantage was create custom silicon. So they would build their own silicon chips which embodied algorithmic trading systems, instead of running them on general purpose computers, which are fast but not as fast as if you have a piece of custom bred silicon that does it for you. Meanwhile, I was earlier I'd been at IBM, and we'd been doing some work where Zip has basically 8 control parameters, 8 knobs that you need to get in the right direction, get into the right setting. And I knew roughly what values those knobs should have, because I'm the person who designed the trading algorithm. But then I thought, well, how about we get the computer to see whether it can improve on my settings for these 8 knobs? So we used a method that's inspired by natural selection, Darwinian evolution. It's called a genetic algorithm, and it worked fantastic. It was better than me. I designed the algorithm, and I thought I knew the best 8 numbers to set these dials to, but actually the GA, the genetic algorithm, found an even better set of numbers. So this was reported in The Economist. We got lots of interest on that, and so we started to ramp it up, and we gave it more control knobs. So this is the 60. This is the 60 knob version, and then we went as far as something that had 120 knobs. Now, when your robot trader has 120 control knobs, and you're a human being like me, a bear of little brain, there is no hope of you setting all of those control parameters to the correct value. We're building more sophisticated robot trading systems which are better than the ones that have fewer control parameters, but the settings of the control parameters can only be decided via an automated process that typically is highly data intensive, because it needs to chew over huge amounts of prior data in order to decide what is the appropriate setting for each of these numbers. So what that now means is that you need a lot of compute power to evaluate all the possible settings of all those control knobs. And so the number of computers back at the institution that was involved got higher and higher and higher. Of course, the net result of that would be fed to the proximity server, which would then reconfigure the silicon, which would then talk to the exchange server. So you still had this kind of architecture, but then Amazon and various other companies started to offer high performance computing in the cloud, and so institutions got rid of all their on-premises compute and started using stuff in the cloud. And so now the financial market's this. Lots of institutions all talking over variable length cables to proximity servers, where the proximity servers talk to silicon, and the silicon is reprogrammed dynamically to do the trading. That is the current setup in the financial markets. Very few people are involved. An awful lot of robots are involved. This is some old data. So from May 2006 to December 2011, so roughly 5 years, the number of human-to-human transactions in financial markets fell from 50% to 5%. The number of human-to-robot transactions held constant at around 45%, and the number of transactions in the financial markets in which both participants, the buyer and the seller, were robots, rose to 50%. 4 days ago in the Financial Times, this article appeared, which was talking about the fact that basically in London, there's now only one open outcry trading pit. That's at the London Metal Exchange, and it's a nice long article in the FT talking about the death of open outcry trading and the disappearance of the role of the human trader in the financial markets. Because we're running short of time, I'm going to skip over this, but basically I did some work where I predicted that maybe some things might go wrong, and then things did go badly wrong in various markets. Lots of things crashed, and a lot of that crashing was because of the rise of automated trading, where people didn't really understand what would happen when all those automated trading systems started to interact with each other. So there was a 2-year government inquiry run by the Foresight team in the Government Office for Science, and I was a key member of that. We published loads of work. Andy Haldane, who's been the chief economist for the Bank of England for the past several years, but at this point he was the director at the Bank for Financial Stability. So he and I and about 5 others worked on that project as the lead expert group. We published a huge big report. We had to give evidence to Parliament. So that's me on the right, talking to a Parliamentary Commission on Banking Standards about the outcome of this inquiry. And the best book, if you want one book that covers all this, is written by someone who, when I was a trader at Deutsche Bank, Kevin was sat behind me. He was running the desk that was trading commodities, especially electricity. And he writes brilliantly about his 20 years worth of observations of the rise of automated trading in financial markets and the rise of data-intensive approaches for doing trading. So then the question is, well, okay, how can we give our students practical experience of this in their studies? One answer would be read lots of books, do maths on historically compiled time series of financial data. But the problem with that, if you only ever work with historical data, is you can never affect the market. You can never do a deal that's so big that if you do it wrong, you get market impact where the price swings against you because of the quantity that you're trading. So if your algorithmic trader can't experience market impact, any work you do on your financial time series data is going to be less interesting than if your algorithmic trader could experience market impact. So the alternative is that you just build and operate your own personal financial exchange. And you may think that I'm joking, but I'm not, because in 2012, so 9 years ago, I started this project called the Bristol Stock Exchange. It's open source, it's freely available, it's public on GitHub, and it is a limit order book financial exchange. I've lost count, 300 or 400 people have used this, both for teaching and for research, and we keep on adding to it. So now people can do research that would otherwise require their own pet exchange, and you can generate shed loads of data. You know, the hundreds of billions of data points per day that we were talking about, you can generate reasonably accurate data from Bristol Stock Exchange. So the kind of student projects that we run, I was never intending to read all this out. This is the last 3 years. These are almost always our master's level students who've done various projects in pieces of work that are relevant to automated trading or understanding the dynamics of highly automated financial markets. All of this is very data intensive. I knew that there was never going to be time for me to talk about any particular piece of research in any depth. But the other thing to realize is that because we're a research intensive university, these are not student projects where we're merely saying, why don't you do that thing that someone did last year and that someone did the year before? Just repeat, do another implementation of something that's well established. That's not how we work. What we like to do is we like to give our students small projects. They have to be doable within 4 months, but we ask those people to do projects which are genuine pieces of research. And then very often we end up writing a paper with the student or gluing several student projects together and writing a bigger paper. And we just have a very long tradition over the last I've been here 14 years of doing that kind of work and getting our work published, or doing consultancy work for the Government Office for Science. And there are so many publications that I didn't really think it would be possible for me to talk about any one of them or any of them in any depth. But nevertheless, if you go to our web pages, find me or find my colleague John Cartledge and look at our list of publications in the public domain, you can see a lot of this work. So I thought I'd just talk very briefly. Oh, wait, I just skipped over things. So with so many students having so much interest in financial technology and in the data science intersection with financial technology, as of this October, we will be running the University of Bristol's first ever FinTech MSc, Financial Technology with Data Science. We already have a very successful Data Science MSc that's been up and running for a year now. We've attracted 80 plus great students, and next year we're going to have an awful lot more students who are all focused purely on financial technology. Most years in our computer science undergraduate degree, where people can do a 4-year master's, so the MEng in computer science, most year about a third of them do projects with me or my colleague John on fintech, and most of them go into working in financial services or in the city for investment banks or hedge funds. And what I'm finding quite interesting now is following them all on LinkedIn as they get more and more senior and thinking, you learnt your first trading algorithm research on Bristol Stock Exchange. So the lab at the moment is John Cartledge and me and Jan Gur and Rami Churb and Jin Zheng. We've got multiple projects going. Any one of these projects I could have spoken about for an hour, but basically we've got active research in automated trading in electricity markets, in using multi-party computation cryptographic obfuscation techniques for giving secure trading in markets, so-called dark pools, which are deliberately set up to allow block traders to trade without suffering market impact. We're looking at how you can best trade when there are multiple different exchanges you might want to trade on. We've used deep learning. We've got a system that various students have been working on for about 4 or 5 years now called Deep Trader, which uses deep learning to just basically sit next to a trader and watch what information comes to the trader and what orders come back from the trader. And it learns to imitate them, to replicate their trading behavior. And sometimes it actually learns to be a better trader than they are. That's another story for another talk. John has done some really great work recently recreating the entire limit order book from restricted amounts of data. So you can get insights into what's going on just by reasoning about what data you can see, which means that things that were previously obscured for you become revealed. Me and 2 students have been looking at co-evolutionary dynamics of financial markets. If Bank A adapts to Bank B, and then Bank B adapts to Bank A's adaptation of Bank B, and then this one readapts and that one readapts, you get this co-evolutionary dynamic in which strange things can happen. And so there are issues of systemic stability there. Robert Shiller, the Nobel Prize winner in economics, recently publicised this notion of narrative economics, and I and several students last year and this year are working on issues of narrative economics in financial markets. We're also looking at latency effects and what happens when you have parallel systems interacting, but where the transmission times are non-uniform. And then I've got a side project which is, you may not realise, but Betfair, the online betting exchange, is essentially a limit order book for bets. It's extremely similar to the limit, in fact, essentially identical to the limit order book for a financial market. And so I and 3 students this year have been working on looking at what we can take from what we know of financial markets and using that to do interesting and profitable things in sports betting markets. And we started 5 minutes late. I said that there would be 10 minutes at the end for questions. There's only 5 minutes, but thank you very much for listening. That's the end.
Thank you so much, Dave. Yeah, again, super interesting talk. And just wanted to apologize to starting the session late. There was, I think, some problem with the Eventbrite not sending the link, but I'm very pleased that you are here. And we had a few questions here. So question and comment, great talk. What do you think about using ensemble MLs on abstract financial data to predict the stock markets, for example, numeri?
That's a very specific question, which demands a very specific answer. I mean, I don't have anything against it. It's not something I've tried for myself. So yeah, I don't have a professional view on it, but yeah, it doesn't. It sounds like a cool thing to try.
Cool. What are the key future challenges facing the financial technology sector with the rise of these robot traders?
Well, that's a good question, and I could talk forever on that. So one issue, I think, is this issue of systemic stability. So you have everyone's building their own little automated trading system and then running it live in the market. But of course, when they've tested their own system, they're testing it against their best guess of what it's going to come up against. But that guess might be wrong. And so then you might get unforeseen interactions between all these automated trading systems. There are precedents for that. I didn't have much time. I just flashed the graphs up. But the flash crash of May the 6th, 2010, $800 billion disappeared from the North American financial markets in less than 15 minutes. And that's since been widely attributed, it's argued, but widely attributed to unforeseen interactions between automated trading systems. Now, that was almost a major financial disaster. The only good thing was that all the automated systems were suspended and then kicked back in and recovered the value in the next 45 minutes. But an event like that really scared regulators. I was working quite closely with people who were involved in regulation at that point. I'm still on the advisory council of the Financial Conduct Authority. So I think regulating and ensuring that markets remain stable and fair and transparent is a really big challenge. And that's a challenge that's largely political rather than largely technical.
Thank you. What are the, if any, scaling issues between Bristol Stock Exchange and a real stock exchange?
Well, a real stock exchange will typically, the IT behind a real stock exchange will be probably hundreds of highly skilled software engineers and developers, probably from a top line company like IBM. And the Bristol Stock Exchange was built by me. So the primary difference of scale is that it's just my version. It's written in Python. It's not written for ultra high speed. I imagine if you pushed it, it would fall over, fairly quickly in terms of you could overload it with having way too many traders, and then the whole thing would just grind to a halt. So it's a really useful. It's a really useful training ground and test bed. So it was initially developed for teaching, but we've used it a lot in research. Think of it as if you've never driven a car and you want to be a Formula One driver, then there's no harm in starting out in a Nissan Micra. Okay, so think of BSE as the Nissan Micra. It's where you first learn to drive, and then if you get good, you can drive something that's much more powerful and much faster, I should say.
A question that we have here is, will the MSc of FinTech be available for remote online study?
Good question. So in year one, in the year that's coming, the answer is no. However, in our regular data science MSc, which has been running for 1 year, we're in the process of transitioning that so that people can study it entirely remotely. That's not yet approved. That's something that's going through the approval process at the moment. So we anticipate that not this October, but the next October, we will be advertising to the general public that if people want to take the main data science MSc entirely remotely as an online part-time degree, they will be able to. The thing is that in any new degree, you want to get it stable. You want to make sure that everything's working right before you do an online version. So we don't have any plans in process, but I would anticipate that maybe in 2 or 3 years' time, we'd do a similar thing for the FinTech MSc. But in its first running, which commences this October, it will be in person only, and it will be full-time. However, our in-person degrees have been entirely remote because of the pandemic. So if anything was to change with our pandemic recovery, then the FinTech would be offered online only, I guess.
There is a question about major cybersecurity risks when financial markets are based on automated robot trading.
Yep, a very good point. I mean, certainly the people that look after security for major financial exchanges are not mucking around. They really, really know what they're doing. They do very sophisticated penetration tests. The servers, the data centers that run big exchanges like the London Stock Exchange will have multiple major power feeds coming in geographically different directions to avoid the likelihood that a plane crash might take out the one power supply. So they have redundant power supplies. And I'm told, I've never been there, but I'm told that when you're close to the London Stock Exchange data center, you can see police officers who are carrying machine guns. And because it's a piece of critical national infrastructure. So they take the actual physical security very carefully, and they take the cyber security extremely carefully. But if you were a nation state, if you don't like Britain, what a way to take it out. So it's, it's an obvious target, but for that reason, huge amounts of resources and very skilled people work on making sure it's as safe as possible.
And how these algorithms work with, what is facing society, climate change.
The social responsibility angle.
Yeah, race and, wars and, how, because race is very impacted by financial conditions at the moment.
Yeah, I think
crisis.
I think the honest answer to that is the kind of systems I've spoken about. All they care about is getting a good deal, and by that what they mean is the best price they can in the market that prevails. Now, then there are political questions which I think are absolutely urgent and should not be dodged, involving whether price is the only factor that should be a consideration, or whether it's possible to have the price reflect supernumerary phenomena. So like, should the price of Shell the oil company, purely be dependent on how good it is at digging oil out the ground and selling it at a profit, or should there perhaps be some kind of something else that affects the price, like perhaps taxation, which would then be a reflection of the broader environmental impacts of companies like that. And I don't mean any ill will to Shell, I just picked that as an example off the top of my head. So again, actually, I think when you're working in the financial markets, very often the questions that come up that are the important ones immediately cross you over into the economic and the political sphere. At root, these robot traders are just trying to get a deal. But the question then is, well, what's the best price, but what is the most appropriate price? And those two prices might be different.
Yeah, I guess regulation, as you said, is also very important.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to have to wrap up soon, but it was the last question. I'm sorry that we couldn't answer all your questions, but thank you so much for your questions. What is the best book on algorithmic trading for beginners?
Oh, well, I flashed up about 8 books when I was saying, why don't you buy on exchange? There's one by the first author is Cartea, and it's got a black cover, and it's like algorithmic and high frequency trading, and it's by Cambridge University Press. But what we do is, when this video goes online, I will provide Patty with a little reading list for those of you who are interested. I mean, that's the book I just mentioned is very technical. That teaches you the technology, but there are also really good books on the kind of the business and the environmental and the political context of this transition. So the Kevin Rogers book that I mentioned is just a great story of how the whole industry changed and how chaotic that was. The Cartea book is deep mathematics and algorithms for doing trading.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for attending today. Please fill up our feedback form. Again, sorry about the slight delay on joining in this event, but we hope to see you in the next events. And thank you so much, Dave. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.